Billen joins me. You've written an extensive piece about Huw Edwards in the Times today. And I should say that obviously I've worked at the BBC for 30 years, woman and child, and have had cause to meet Huw Edwards on various occasions, including, I think, once being a guest on the 1 o'clock news. And I always found him to be congenial, affable, quietly spoken, you know, and a pleasure to hang out with. And that's my experience of him. When I said so to Kevin O'Sullivan yesterday on the programme, he said, well, actually, he had heard various rumours to the contrary. Then, of course, the story continues, and now we hear that Newsnight, a BBC, organ of some prestige, was looking into Huw Edwards and allegations against him before The Sun published a word. So we do have a deepening story, and it seems that my impression of Huw was only my impression, not necessarily everybody else's.
Well, we're not one people, are we?
No.
We're lots of people, and Huw is a performer, and he knows how to present himself, of course. I wouldn't call him a friend of mine. I would say I met him for an in-depth interview in 2022. It was actually in the middle of COVID, so we actually met outside in a cemetery, which was rather weird.
Yes.
But he liked the piece, which was in the Times magazine, and then I did another interview with him a little bit. A year later, maybe. And then last summer, we had our first quite long lunch. And he is great fun, actually. One of the things that's frustrated Huw, I think, in his career is that because he's behind that august desk, giving generally pretty bad news about other things to the public, that side of him has not really been expressed. And I think that was a cause of frustration.
Did he say that? Did he say
Yeah.
he would have liked a sort of broader role? Because people like Clive Myrie, you know, branch out into, you know, hosting quiz shows, and there are various kind of news readers, like Fiona Bruce, for example, his colleague, who presents the Antiques Roadshow, which shows a less formal side to her, different sort of interests. She also does that show about, is it a fake or isn't it a fake, whatever that one is. And he Huw Edwards had never seemed to do anything except very straight news.
Yes, there used to be an argument that you have an anchor, the face of the corporation's news service, you don't let him appear on the Morecambe and Wise show. When Clive Myrie, of course, went on Have I Got News for You the other week, and it was slightly uneasy. He had to be taken off reading the news that night. But Huw, in one interview, did say that somebody had said to him at a public event, I never realised that you were funny. And he said, what's that say about my career, my job?
Well, it says he had a serious job to do.
He had to do his job.
Had a serious job. But let me ask you this. You say you interviewed him once. You say you interviewed him twice. You said he liked the first interview, so therefore was genial towards you and positive. Didn't like the second one as much.
I don't know that. He didn't thank me for it.
He didn't thank. Should he have thanked? Do people normally thank you?
He only judging by the last time, he seemed very relieved. The first time he did it, he seemed very relieved. Yeah. He sent me a very nice humorous note. Then there was silence, but he wasn't really offended because then he invited me to lunch.
Oh, so he invited you to lunch.
Yeah.
And did you get the impression that that was because he thought you were a good, fun person to have lunch with, or did you think it might be because he wanted to, I don't know, posit the theory of something to you or sound you out in some way? Because, you know, people in the public eye invite a journalist out for lunch at their own risk, really, don't they?
Yes, this first lunch, which was last summer, was a gossipy affair, and we talked about his career, the state of television, but generally we kind of had a laugh. We were gossiping about the industry, you know, his and mine.
Yes.
I can't tell you what we gossiped about because it was an off-the-record private lunch. There wasn't any hidden agenda to it, I didn't think. And equally, yes, we had lunch last Thursday. That wasn't because he'd rung on Wednesday and said, we need lunch.
No.
That was something that we'd been talking about doing for about 6 months, and we had never got round to actually doing.
And when you had lunch with him last Thursday, did he seem, as far as you were aware, you know, at his best? He seemed relaxed, he seemed at ease, he seemed like someone who's really looking forward to tucking into an excellent lunch in great company, that kind of thing, or did he seem tense and worried?
No, this was why it was so distressing and alarming for me to hear over the weekend that these allegations were being made against him, because I'm completely convinced he had no idea of what was coming. He'd just come back on a very early train from Edinburgh, where he'd been covering the Scottish Crown Jewels event with the King.
Yes.
He was quite full of that. You know, wanted to talk about the royal family, and we had, you know, the atmosphere was celebratory. It was probably lighter than the year before, because he'd signed a 3-year new contract to present the news.
Yes.
We talked about our families. They all say a great family man, but he really did talk about his wife in loving terms, and very pleased with the progress his 5 children were making through life.
Yes.
at university and beyond.
So you didn't get a sense. It's interesting that you say that he felt that, or feels that he had been sort of confined in some way, restricted by, you know, being a serious news presenter, where you have to present the news in a dispassionate yet compassionate way. It's a very difficult thing to do. People think it's a right cinch to just read a bit of autocue. It's not easy at all, because you can't enter into it with too much vigour. Also, you can't enter it with too little. It's really a very difficult path to tread. That's why so few people can do it very well, and he's one of the very, very best at it. But the idea that it was restrictive, that actually he's funny, he's bigger than that, he's more quirky than that, or more eccentric, or more interesting than that, more nuanced than that. You didn't get any sense that he might have been wanting to say anything like, listen, you know, I have to be the epitome of, you know, sobriety and, I don't know, sanctity, and I have to uphold a certain sort of values. But actually, I'm much more complicated than that, and there are facets of me that, you know, nobody could even imagine existing, nothing of that kind.
Yes, it's interesting you say that, Vanessa, because see, we were talking about going for a walk along the the South Wales coast, and he said we could, you know, you could write this up, and I could talk about my hinterlands, and among all those things, you know, he's funnier than he seems. He's more cynical than he appears. He's more sensitive and vulnerable than he appears on TV. He's also more Welsh than he appears.
Yes.
And that's really important to him. And so while I don't think hosting a quiz show might be the right fit,
yes,
he is a really skilled documentary maker, and he's made some wonderful documentaries about Wales. And he can talk to camera, you know, walking and talking for it just felt like 2 minutes, you know, without any auto cue or anything, just expressing his passion for that country.
But you didn't get the sense that what he was saying, you know, alongside I'm funny, actually, I'm light-hearted, I can be frivolous, I can be, as you say, I can be satirical, cynical, you know, I can be all sorts of things. I can also be not quite that family man that I'm portrayed as, or I have portrayed myself as. There are actually other things going on in my life that, gosh, aren't necessarily what people might imagine, not that.
No, if he had said anything like that, I wouldn't have been so horrified.
Or even hinted at.
Absolutely not.
Nothing whatsoever.
I'm afraid maybe I'm a very bad interviewer, but this was a lunch date.
Well, you weren't interviewing him, you were having lunch.
I wasn't interviewing, and he had, you know, previously talked about his mental health.
Yes.
He hadn't got past his father's death 10 years before. He was very close to his father in his latter years. He had been a distant father as a child, as an academic. He obviously looks up to his dad, a historian, very much. He talks a lot about not wasting his life. You know, maybe he should write a history book, that sort of thing. I didn't feel he wanted to, you know, to get into light entertainment, as we used to call it.
But a driven man, and a man who felt, you say in your piece today, very much outside the norm at the BBC, been rejected by Oxbridge, never quite got over it, that kind of a thing. So feeling all sorts of, I suppose, and also his father, somebody he venerated as a very serious historian of great stature, and wanting to kind of prove and do more and more things. Now, one of the things he hasn't said through all of this furore and debacle, and no one has said on his behalf, even his wife, is Huw is entirely innocent of any of these allegations and suggestions. You know, he's never been in contact with any of these people. He's never done any of these sorts of things. And we heard Jeremy Vine say, it wasn't me. And Nikki Campbell say, it wasn't me. And Gary Lineker, it's not me. And Rylan, take my name out your mouth, it ain't me. We've heard all of those. Now, he could have said, it's not me and I didn't do it, or it is me and I'm completely innocent of all of those things. His wife could have said, once he's better and he's out of hospital, he will be saying that he's innocent of any of these allegations and suggestions, hasn't done anything of the kind. No lawyer has said it either. So that's, I would think, a kind of chasm of silence where there could have been something. So this is my next question for you. If it turns out that the allegations of conduct, which don't include obviously breaking the law, but might include all the various suggestions of inappropriate messaging and maybe #MeToo, kind of imposing power on junior staff and maybe meeting some fellow or woman or whatever it is in lockdown for some kind of sexual assignation, or all the various things that everybody is now familiar with. If they do turn out, some or all of them, to have been true, do you think this man of considerable talent, who you quite clearly admire very much as a professional, will be lost to us in terms of broadcasting because his career will be well and truly over?
Well, can I just say one thing first about his silence?
Yes.
We don't know his mental state over the weekend or in the last few days. We really don't know whether he was capable of making that decision to out himself, as it were, as the then unnamed presenter. We just don't know. So I'm not going to criticise him or his wife.
I'm not criticising at all.
lawyer.
I'm just saying nobody said he didn't do it. They haven't said that, have they?
They haven't said
so
that.
if it turns out that any of it is true, do you think it will be impossible for him to broadcast again? We will never hear or see him on the telly again?
Well, my hunch is that we will never see him behind the anchor desk again on a general election or probably on a news bulletin. But I suspect, and I hope, I really hope actually, that we do see him on television making documentaries, doing on subjects he really cares about.
Andrew Billen, thank you so much for coming in.